The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the cramped break room of Meridian Tech Solutions, casting harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Sarah Chen sat alone at the corner table, her small frame hunched over a paperback novel, dark hair falling like a curtain around her face. The book's pages were dog-eared and yellowed, a spy thriller she had read countless times before. To her coworkers, she appeared to be just another quiet office worker, blending into the beige walls and forgotten corners of their mundane corporate world. 3 tables away, the usual crowd gathered around Marcus Webb, the company's self-proclaimed alpha male. His booming voice carried across the room as he regaled his audience with another embellished tale of his weekend warrior exploits. Marcus stood 6 feet tall with a gym-sculpted physique that he never missed an opportunity to showcase through tight-fitting polo shirts. His sandy hair was styled with military precision, though he had never served a day in uniform. So there I was, rappelling down this cliff face. Marcus gestured wildly, nearly knocking over his energy drink. Must have been a 100-foot drop, but I handled it like it was nothing. The instructor said he'd never seen anyone take to tactical climbing that fast. His audience of junior employees nodded appreciatively, hanging on every word. Among them sat Derek Morrison, a nervous accountant who compensated for his insecurities by latching onto Marcus's stories. Beside him, Jennifer Walsh from marketing giggled at appropriate intervals, her attention clearly focused more on Marcus's biceps than his tails. "That's incredible," Derek chimed in. "I could never do anything like that. I get dizzy just changing light bulbs." Marcus puffed out his chest. "It's all about mental toughness, man. Most people just don't have what it takes. They see danger and freeze up like scared rabbits." Sarah turned a page in her book, the soft rustling barely audible above Marcus's voice. She had learned long ago that invisibility was often the best strategy in environments like this. Let the peacocks strut and preen while she focused on her work and went home to her quiet apartment each evening. Speaking of scared rabbits, Marcus's voice took on a mocking tone. "Looks like our resident mouse is hiding in her corner again." Sarah's fingers tightened slightly on her book's spine, but she didn't look up. She had endured worse than office bullying. Much worse. Jennifer followed Marcus's gaze and laughed. "Oh, you mean Sarah? I don't think I've heard her say more than 10 words since she started here 6 months ago. Probably afraid of her own shadow," Derek added, eager to join in the mockery. "Some people just aren't cut out for the real world." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a cruel smile playing across his lips. "You know what I think? I bet she's never done anything exciting in her entire life. Never taken a risk, never pushed herself, never faced real danger. Some people are just born followers." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah continued reading, though the letters seemed to blur slightly on the page. She had faced danger that these people couldn't begin to imagine. She had pushed herself beyond limits that existed only in Marcus's fantasy scenarios. But they would never know that, and she preferred it that way. "I mean, look at her," Marcus continued, warming to his theme. "Probably goes home every night to watch Netflix and eat ice cream. Never been in a real fight. Never had to make life or death decisions. Some people live their whole lives in a bubble, you know." A few other employees had begun to notice the conversation, drawn by Marcus's increasingly loud voice. The break room fell into an uncomfortable silence broken only by the hum of the vending machine and the tick of the wall clock. Sarah closed her book slowly and stood up. She was small, barely 5'4", with delicate features that made her appear younger than her 28 years. Her clothes were simple and professional, a gray sweater and black slacks that hung loosely on her slight frame. Nothing about her appearance suggested the steel that lay beneath the surface. She walked to the sink, rinsed out her coffee mug, and placed it in the dish rack. Her movements were precise and economical, a habit ingrained through years of training that her coworkers couldn't recognize. As she turned to leave, Marcus couldn't resist one final jab. "See what I mean? Runs away at the first sign of confrontation. Probably never stood up for herself in her life." Sarah paused at the doorway, her hand resting lightly on the frame. For just a moment, her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders squaring, weight settling into a balanced stance that spoke of combat readiness. But the moment passed, and she continued out of the room without a word. The group around Marcus erupted in nervous laughter, the tension breaking like a snapped rubber band. But something in Sarah's brief pause had unsettled Jennifer, though she couldn't put her finger on what. That was kind of harsh, she said quietly. Marcus waved dismissively. She needs to toughen up if she's going to survive in the business world. I'm doing her a favor by giving her a reality check. Back at her desk, Sarah settled into her ergonomic chair and opened the quarterly reports she had been reviewing. Her workstation was meticulously organized. No personal photos, no decorative items, just the essential tools of her trade as a financial analyst. To her colleagues, it appeared sterile and impersonal. In reality, it reflected the discipline of someone who had learned that personal attachments could become vulnerabilities. The afternoon passed quietly. Sarah worked with focused intensity, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she analyzed market trends and compiled data. She was good at her job, better than good, actually, but she kept her head down and avoided drawing attention to her capabilities. Excellence, she had learned, could be as dangerous as failure in the wrong circumstances. As 5 o'clock approached, the office began to empty. Sarah was often among the last to leave, partly because she had no pressing social obligations waiting for her, and partly because the quiet evening hours allowed her to work without the constant undercurrent of office politics and personality conflicts. She was just finishing up her final report when she heard voices approaching her desk. Marcus and Derek were walking toward the elevator, deep in conversation about their weekend plans. You should come to the tactical shooting course with me, Marcus was saying. It's at this private range about an hour outside the city. They teach real military-style combat scenarios. Derek looked uncertain. I don't know, man. I've never even held a gun before. That's exactly why you need this, Marcus insisted. Learn to be a warrior instead of a victim. The world's a dangerous place, and you need to be ready to protect yourself and the people you care about. They passed Sarah's desk without acknowledging her presence, continuing their conversation as they waited for the elevator. The instructor is this ex-Army Ranger, Marcus continued. He's taught me techniques that most civilians never get to learn. Advanced marksmanship, tactical movement, close-quarters combat. The real deal. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. Just before the doors closed, Marcus glanced back at Sarah's desk and shook his head. Too bad some people are just too scared to live life to the fullest, he said loud enough for her to hear. Sarah saved her work and began shutting down her computer. The office grew quiet around her, the only sounds the hum of the air conditioning and the distant rumble of traffic from the street below. She gathered her things methodically, laptop bag, light jacket, the same paperback novel she had been reading at lunch. As she walked to the elevator, her reflection caught in the darkened windows. To anyone watching, she looked like exactly what her co-workers believed her to be, a timid office worker heading home to an evening of solitary routine. They couldn't see the scars hidden beneath her conservative clothing, couldn't recognize the hyper-vigilant awareness that never fully switched off, couldn't detect the muscle memory that turned her body into a precision instrument even in civilian clothes. The elevator descended silently, carrying her down from the 20th floor to the parking garage. Her footsteps echoed in the concrete space as she walked to her car, a modest sedan that blended perfectly into any crowd. Nothing flashy, nothing memorable, nothing that would draw unwanted attention. She drove home through the evening traffic, taking a route that varied slightly each day out of habit rather than necessity. Her apartment was in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where neighbors minded their own business and asked few questions. It suited her perfectly. The apartment itself was spartanly furnished, but comfortable. No photographs adorned the walls. No personal mementos cluttered the surfaces. A casual observer might think she had just moved in, but Sarah had lived there for over a year. She simply preferred to travel light through life, both literally and metaphorically. She changed into workout clothes and descended to the basement of her building, where she had permission to use a small storage room. Inside, hidden behind boxes of Christmas decorations and old furniture, was her private gym. A heavy bag hung from reinforced ceiling joists, surrounded by a collection of weights and exercise equipment that she had accumulated over time. Sarah wrapped her hands carefully and began her evening routine. Her movements were fluid and precise, each strike delivered with textbook form. The heavy bag absorbed the impact of combinations that would have impressed any martial arts instructor. But there were no observers here to witness her skill. For 30 minutes, she worked through her training regimen, striking drills, footwork patterns, grappling techniques practiced against imaginary opponents. Her breathing remained controlled throughout, her heart rate elevated but not strained. This was maintenance training, designed to keep her skills sharp rather than to build new ones. When she finished, she unwrapped her hands and checked her watch. 7:30. Time for dinner and an evening of reading before bed. The routine was comforting in its predictability, a stark contrast to the chaotic unpredictability of her former life. She prepared a simple meal of grilled chicken and vegetables, eating while reviewing financial news on her tablet. The markets had been volatile lately, creating opportunities for those skilled enough to read the patterns. Tomorrow she would present her analysis to her supervisor, recommendations that would likely save the company significant money. She doubted Marcus or his followers would ever appreciate the tactical thinking required for successful market analysis. As darkness fell outside her windows, Sarah settled into her reading chair with her well-worn novel. The story was familiar, a tale of international espionage and covert operations, but she found comfort in its predictable rhythms. Fiction was safe. In fiction, the heroes always won, the mission always succeeded, and everyone made it home. The clock on her wall ticked steadily toward bedtime. Tomorrow would bring another day at Meridian Tech Solutions, another 8 hours of spreadsheets and financial projections, another round of Marcus's boastful stories and casual cruelties. She could endure it all with the patience of someone who had survived far worse. But sometimes, in moments like this, she wondered what would happen if her carefully constructed facade ever slipped. If her coworkers ever glimpsed the person she used to be, the skills she still possessed, the missions she had completed in places whose names couldn't appear in any official record. Marcus thought he understood what it meant to be a warrior. He played at tact. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical for Seattle in late October. Sarah arrived at the office 15 minutes early, as was her custom, using the quiet time to review her agenda and prepare for the day ahead. She had learned long ago that preparation was the foundation of success, whether in corporate boardrooms or hostile territory. The office slowly came to life around her. Coworkers trickled in, clutching coffee cups and checking their phones, settling into the familiar rhythms of another Tuesday. Sarah worked steadily through her morning tasks, analyzing quarterly projections and preparing her presentation for the afternoon management meeting. Around 10:30, a commotion near the reception area caught her attention. She glanced up to see Marcus holding court with a larger-than-usual audience, his voice carrying across the open office space with unusual excitement. "I'm telling you, it was incredible," he was saying to Derek and Jennifer, along with several other employees who had gathered around his desk. "The instructor said I had natural talent. Military-grade reflexes, he called it." Sarah returned her attention to her computer screen, but Marcus's voice was difficult to ignore. "We ran through this urban warfare scenario," he continued, clearly relishing the attention. "Multiple targets, hostage situation, the works. I cleared the course faster than anyone in the class." The instructor pulled me aside afterward and said I reminded him of some of the special forces guys he'd worked with. Jennifer giggled appropriately. "That's amazing, Marcus. You're like a real-life action hero." "It's all about mindset," Marcus replied, puffing out his chest. "Most people freeze up when the pressure's on. But I stay cool under fire. It's a gift, really. Some people have it, others don't." Derek nodded eagerly. "I wish I had nerves like that. I get nervous just giving presentations." "That's your problem right there," Marcus said with the confidence of someone dispensing profound wisdom. "You've got a victim mentality. In a real crisis situation, you'd probably curl up in a ball and wait for someone else to save you." The conversation continued in this vein for several more minutes, with Marcus describing his tactical prowess in increasingly elaborate detail. He spoke of headshots at impossible distances, lightning-fast target acquisition, and combat instincts that his instructor claimed were worthy of elite military units. Sarah found herself listening despite her better judgment. She had heard similar stories countless times before, usually from weekend warriors who confused playing soldier with actual service. Marcus's descriptions of his shooting course bore little resemblance to real tactical training, but his audience lacked the experience to recognize the difference. The best part, Marcus was saying, is that we're going back next weekend for advanced training. Vehicle interdiction, close quarters battle, the really hardcore stuff. The instructor's bringing in some of his military buddies to help with the scenarios. Isn't that dangerous? Asked Tom Bradley, a software developer who rarely participated in Marcus's stories. Marcus laughed dismissively. Only if you don't know what you're doing. But when you've got natural ability like I do, you can handle anything they throw at you. Besides, this is the kind of training that separates the sheep from the wolves. He gestured broadly around the office. Look around this place. 90% of these people would be helpless in a real emergency. They live in their safe little bubbles, never testing themselves, never finding out what they're really made of. His gaze landed briefly on Sarah's desk before moving on. Take our quiet little mouse over there. I guarantee you she's never been in a situation where her life depended on making the right decision under pressure. Probably never even seen a gun outside of movies. Sarah's typing rhythm didn't change, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had made life-or-death decisions in situations that Marcus couldn't begin to imagine. She had been shot at by experts who were trying to kill her, not weekend warriors playing with paintball guns. But she maintained her composure, letting Marcus's ignorant assumptions wash over her like background noise. The morning wore on, and the crowd around Marcus's desk eventually dispersed. Sarah finished her projections and began preparing her presentation slides, focusing on the complex market analysis that would guide the company's investment strategy for the next quarter. Her work required the same kind of strategic thinking that had once guided mission planning in very different circumstances. At lunch, she retreated to her usual corner table in the break room, opening her paperback novel to a dog-eared page. The familiar story provided a welcome escape from the office politics and posturing that seemed to dominate every social interaction in this place. She had only been reading for a few minutes when Marcus's voice once again filled the room. He was describing his weekend adventure to a new audience, adding fresh embellishments to an already inflated tale. The thing about real tactical training, he was explaining to Paul Rivers, a senior accountant who had recently joined the company, is that it reveals your true character. When you're facing multiple armed opponents and innocent lives are on the line, there's nowhere to hide. You either have what it takes or you don't. Paul looked impressed despite himself. It sounds intense. Are you thinking of pursuing it professionally? Marcus shrugged with false modesty. The instructor did mention that I had the kind of natural talent they look for in special operations units. Said it was a shame I didn't join the military when I was younger, because I could have been one of the elite. Sarah turned a page in her book, the motion sharp enough to make a soft snapping sound. Marcus glanced in her direction, then continued his monologue. Of course, not everyone is cut out for that kind of life. It takes a special breed of person to handle real pressure, real danger. Most people are followers by nature. They need someone stronger to protect them. He lowered his voice conspiratorially, though not enough to prevent Sarah from hearing. Take Sarah over there. Nice enough girl, I suppose, but completely helpless in any kind of crisis. I bet she's never even stood up to a playground bully, let alone faced actual danger. Paul glanced towards Sarah's table, then back at Marcus. She seems competent enough at her job. Oh sure, Marcus agreed. She can crunch numbers and hide behind spreadsheets. But put her in a situation where she has to think on her feet, where there's real pressure and real consequences. She'd fold like a house of cards. The conversation drifted to other topics, but Marcus's words lingered in the air like smoke. Sarah continued reading, though she found herself going over the same paragraph multiple times without absorbing the content. She had faced pressure and consequences that made Marcus's weekend warrior fantasies look like children's games. The afternoon brought her scheduled presentation to the management team. Sarah gathered her materials and made her way to the conference room, where senior executives were already taking their seats around the polished wooden table. This was her element, presenting complex analysis to decision-makers who needed clear, actionable intelligence. For 20 minutes, she walked them through her market research and projections. Her presentation was flawless, delivered with quiet confidence, and backed by meticulous data analysis. She answered questions with precision and provided insights that would save the company millions in potential losses. When she finished, the room erupted in appreciative murmurs. CFO Patricia Wells nodded approvingly. Excellent work, Sarah. Your analysis of the Southeast Asian markets is particularly insightful. How soon can you prepare a full implementation strategy? I can have preliminary recommendations ready by Thursday, Sarah replied. Full implementation plans by early next week. As the meeting broke up, Sarah felt a familiar satisfaction. She might not be able to discuss her real accomplishments, but she could still excel at the challenges this new life presented. The skills that had made her an elite warrior, attention to detail, strategic thinking, ability to perform under pressure, served her well in corporate America. She was walking back to her desk when she overheard Marcus talking to Derek near the water cooler. Did you see how nervous she looked during that presentation? Marcus was saying. Probably terrified of speaking in front of important people. I bet her hands were shaking the whole time. Derek nodded eagerly. I could never do what she does with all those numbers and charts. But you're right about the pressure thing. She definitely seems like the type who would crack under real stress. Sarah paused at her desk, pretending to organize some papers while she listened. That's what I mean about natural leadership, Marcus continued. Some people are born to command respect. Others are born to follow orders. It's hardwired into our DNA. People like Sarah will always need people like us to protect them when things get tough. The irony was almost overwhelming. Sarah had commanded respect from some of America's most elite warriors. She had led missions that required split-second decisions with international consequences. She had protected people whose names would never appear in public records, preventing disasters that Marcus's imagination couldn't conjure. But she said nothing, returning to her work with the same quiet focus that had carried her through countless dangerous situations. Her ability to remain calm and controlled in the face of ignorance and provocation was just another skill in her arsenal, one that served her well in this strange peacetime existence. The rest of the afternoon passed uneventfully. Sarah completed her assigned tasks with mechanical precision, answered emails with professional courtesy, and participated in the routine maintenance of corporate bureaucracy. To her coworkers, she remained the quiet, unremarkable woman who had somehow landed a job analyzing markets for a mid-sized tech company. As 5 o'clock approached, the office began its familiar wind down. Computers were shutting off. Conversations shifted from work topics to evening plans, and the elevator bank filled with employees eager to escape to their personal lives. Sarah was packing up her desk when she noticed Marcus approaching with Derek and Jennifer in tow. They looked like they were planning something, and experience had taught her to be wary of groups that moved with obvious purpose. Hey Sarah, Marcus said, his tone carrying false friendliness. We were just talking about this tactical shooting course I've been taking. You should come check it out this weekend. Sarah looked up from her laptop bag, her expression neutral. Thank you, but I'm not really interested in that sort of thing. Come on, Marcus pressed, clearly enjoying himself. It would be good for you to try something outside your comfort zone. Learn some self-confidence, you know? The instructor always says that shooting sports are great for building character. Jennifer giggled nervously. It might be fun, Sarah. Like a team-building exercise. Besides, Derek added, in today's world, everyone should know how to protect themselves. You never know when you might face a dangerous situation. Sarah closed her laptop bag slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. I appreciate the invitation, but I'll have to pass. Marcus's smile took on a predatory quality. I figured you'd say that. Some people just aren't cut out for challenging themselves. Nothing wrong with playing it safe, I suppose. He leaned against her desk casually, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly intended to intimidate. The thing is, Sarah, life doesn't always give you a choice about facing challenges. Sometimes danger comes looking for you, whether you're ready or not. Sarah stood slowly, her compact frame seeming somehow larger despite giving up nearly a foot in height to Marcus. Her dark eyes met his gaze steadily, and, for just a moment, something flickered in their depths that made him take an unconscious half-step backward. You're probably right, she said quietly. Sometimes danger does come looking for you. The words hung in the air between them, carrying undertones that none of them could quite identify. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, though he couldn't understand why. There was something in Sarah's tone, something in the way she held herself, that suggested depths he hadn't expected to find. But the moment passed quickly. Sarah slung her bag over her shoulder and walked toward the elevator, leaving Marcus and his followers standing by her empty desk. "See what I mean?" Marcus said after a moment, his voice not quite as confident as before. "Total mouse. Probably goes home to hide under her blankets." But as he watched Sarah disappear into the elevator, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just encountered something unexpected, something that didn't fit his neat categories of strong and weak, predator and prey. Sarah rode the elevator down in silence, her mind processing the interaction with clinical detachment. Marcus's attempt at intimidation had been clumsy and ineffective, the kind of dominance display she had learned to recognize and counter long ago. He was playing games he didn't understand with someone whose true capabilities remained hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed normalcy. As she drove home through the darkening streets, Sarah reflected on the strange duality of her current existence. By day, she was the quiet analyst who crunched numbers and avoided confrontation. By night, she maintained the skills and readiness of someone who had once operated in the world's most dangerous places. It was a sustainable balance, she told herself. She could endure Marcus's casual crew Friday afternoon, brought an unusual tension to the offices of Meridian Tech Solutions. Word had spread that Marcus Webb would be bringing photos and videos from his weekend tactical training course, and a small crowd had gathered around his workstation in anticipation of another installment in his ongoing warrior narrative. Sarah worked quietly at her desk, 3 rows away from the commotion, finishing her quarterly market analysis for the Southeast Asian division. Her fingers moved efficiently across the keyboard, translating complex economic data into actionable intelligence that would guide millions of dollars in corporate investment decisions. The work required the same kind of analytical precision she had once applied to mission planning, though the stakes were considerably different. "Check this out," Marcus's voice carried across the office as he held up his smartphone, showing a video to his assembled audience. "This is from last weekend's close quarters combat course. Watch me clear this room in under 15 seconds. Sarah glanced up briefly to see Derek and Jennifer crowded around Marcus's desk, along with several other employees who had been drawn by the excitement. Tom Bradley stood slightly apart from the group, looking skeptical but curious. The video played on Marcus's phone, showing a dimly lit room with cardboard targets positioned behind various obstacles. Marcus appeared on screen wearing tactical gear that looked fresh from the catalog, moving through the space with exaggerated precision. His movements were theatrical rather than tactical, designed more for visual impact than operational efficiency. "Boom! Hostile down," Marcus narrated as his on-screen persona fired at a target. "See how I sliced the pie around that corner? That's advanced room-clearing technique right there. Military-grade stuff." Jennifer clapped appreciatively. "You look so professional in all that gear." "The instructor said I was a natural," Marcus replied, clearly enjoying the attention. "He's worked with SEALs and Green Berets, and he told me I had the same kind of instinctive tactical awareness they look for in special operations candidates." Sarah's typing paused for just a moment. She had worked with actual SEALs and Green Berets, and Marcus's weekend warrior performance bore no resemblance to real tactical movement. His clearing technique was sloppy, his weapon handling casual, and his situational awareness non-existent. But she said nothing, returning her attention to her spreadsheet analysis. "This is the really cool part," Marcus continued, swiping to another video. "Multi-target engagement under time pressure. Watch my target transition speed." The second video showed Marcus engaging a series of paper targets arranged in a simple line. His shooting was adequate for a recreational course, though his form and timing would have earned him remedial training in any serious program. Still, his audience was suitably impressed by the rapid-fire demonstration. "Incredible," Derek breathed. "How do you stay so calm under pressure?" "It's all about mindset," Marcus explained, settling into his favorite role as tactical expert. "Most people panic when the shooting starts, but elite warriors like me have trained ourselves to think clearly in chaotic situations. It's what separates the professionals from the amateurs." Tom Bradley stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. "Have you considered applying this training professionally? I mean, if you're as good as your instructor says, Maybe you should look into security work or law enforcement. Marcus hesitated for just a moment, clearly not having expected the suggestion to be taken seriously. Well, I've thought about it, he said carefully. But the corporate world needs people with warrior mindset too, you know? Leadership under pressure, strategic thinking, the ability to make tough decisions. Those skills transfer. Paul Rivers joined the group, drawn by the commotion. What's all this about? Marcus has been taking some kind of tactical training course, Tom explained. Apparently, he's got natural talent for military-style operations. Paul looked skeptical. What kind of tactical training? Marcus launched into his now familiar explanation, describing the weekend course as if it were advanced military preparation. He spoke of combat scenarios, hostile environments, and split-second decision-making with the confidence of someone who had never faced actual combat. The instructor is this ex-Army Ranger, Marcus was saying. He runs the course like a real military operation. No safety nets, no second chances. If you can't handle the pressure, you wash out. Sarah found herself listening despite her better judgment. She had trained with actual Army Rangers, and she knew the difference between weekend entertainment and professional preparation. Marcus's descriptions made the course sound like elaborate theater rather than serious tactical education. Sounds intense, Paul said. How many people actually complete the program? About 50% make it through the basic course, Marcus replied. But only the real naturals get invited to the advanced program. That's where they separate the warriors from the wannabes. He gestured around the office with casual arrogance. Most people in a place like this would never even attempt something like that. They're too comfortable with their safe, predictable lives to test themselves against real challenges. His gaze swept past Sarah's desk, and she felt the familiar sting of his casual dismissal. To Marcus, she represented everything weak and timid about the civilian world, someone who hid behind spreadsheets rather than facing the realities of a dangerous world. Take our quiet little analyst over there, Marcus said, nodding towards Sarah's workstation. I bet she's never been in a situation where physical courage was required. Probably runs away from confrontation rather than standing her ground. Jennifer followed his gaze and giggled. She does seem like the type who would hide behind someone else if trouble started. Derek nodded eagerly. In a real emergency, you need people who can think on their feet and take action. Not everyone is cut out for that kind of responsibility. Sarah's fingers continued moving across the keyboard, but her breathing deepened slightly, a response to stress that had been ingrained through years of combat training. She was analyzing market volatility in emerging economies, translating chaos into comprehensible patterns, but her coworkers saw only a timid woman hiding behind numbers. That's what this training is really about, Marcus continued, warming to his theme. Learning to be the kind of person others can count on when things get dangerous. Building the mental toughness to handle whatever life throws at you. Tom looked thoughtful. Maybe some of us should consider taking the course ourselves. It sounds like valuable training. Marcus shook his head. It's not for everyone, man. You have to have the right mindset going in. Some people are just naturally more suited for leadership roles than others. He leaned against his desk, adopting the pose of someone dispensing hard-won wisdom. The instructor always says that in a crisis situation, people fall into two categories: those who step up and take charge, and those who wait to be rescued. It's hardwired into your personality from birth. Paul frowned. That seems like an oversimplification. Most people just haven't been tested in extreme situations. Maybe, Marcus allowed, but I think you can usually tell. Look at how people handle stress in their daily lives. Do they take charge, or do they defer to others? Do they seek out challenges, or do they avoid anything that might be uncomfortable? His analysis continued in this vein for several more minutes, with Marcus positioning himself as someone who naturally gravitated toward leadership and challenge while dismissing his co-workers as followers and comfort seekers. The irony was lost on him that Sarah, sitting quietly at her desk, had faced challenges that would have broken him mentally and physically. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd around Marcus's desk gradually dispersed. People returned to their workstations, but the conversation had planted seeds that continued to grow throughout the remainder of the day. Marcus had successfully positioned himself as the office alpha, the one person who possessed the warrior qualities that everyone else lacked. Sarah finished her market analysis and began preparing her weekly summary report. The work required intense concentration, synthesizing vast amounts of data into clear strategic recommendations. It was the kind of mental challenge that had once helped her process intelligence briefings and mission parameters in far more dangerous circumstances. At 5 o'clock, she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave. The office had largely emptied, but Marcus was still at his desk, showing his tactical videos to a new audience of employees who had missed the afternoon presentation. As Sarah walked toward the elevator, she heard him describing his shooting performance to a maintenance worker who had stopped to listen. The key is staying calm under pressure, Marcus was explaining. Most people freeze up when they're facing multiple targets, but I've trained myself to think tactically in chaotic situations. It's all about compartmentalizing the stress and focusing on the mission. The maintenance worker nodded politely, clearly more interested in finishing his work than in Marcus's tactical theories. But Marcus continued his explanation, describing weapon handling and target engagement as if he were briefing a military operation rather than recounting a weekend recreational activity. Sarah pressed the elevator button and waited, listening to Marcus's familiar refrain about natural warriors and leadership qualities. She had heard variations of this speech dozens of times over the past few months, and it never failed to amaze her how confidently he spoke about concepts he had never truly experienced. The elevator arrived, and she stepped inside. As the doors began to close, she caught a fragment of Marcus's continuing monologue. The thing is, in a real crisis situation, training only gets you so far. You need natural instincts, the kind of reflexes that can't be taught. Either you have them or you don't. The doors closed completely, cutting off his voice. Sarah rode down to the parking garage in silence, reflecting on the strange disconnect between Marcus's perceptions and reality. He spoke confidently about crisis situations and natural instincts, completely unaware that the quiet woman he dismissed as timid had reflexes honed by training he couldn't imagine and tested in situations that would have shattered his carefully constructed self-image. She drove home through the evening traffic, taking her usual route through neighborhoods that had become familiar over the past year. Her apartment building appeared ahead, a modest structure that offered anonymity and security in equal measure. That evening, Sarah followed her established routine. She changed into workout clothes and descended to her private training space in the building's basement. The familiar ritual of wrapping her hands and preparing for training helped clear her mind of the day's frustrations. For 45 minutes, she worked through combinations that flowed like water, each movement precise and economical. Her striking techniques bore no resemblance to the theatrical movements Marcus had displayed in his videos. These were combat-tested skills, refined through countless hours of training and proven in situations where failure meant death. When she finished training, Sarah unwrapped her hands and checked her watch. 8:15, time for dinner and an evening of reading before bed. The routine was comforting in its predictability, a sharp contrast to the uncertainty and danger that had once defined her existence. As she prepared a simple meal of grilled salmon and steamed vegetables, Sarah found herself thinking about Marcus's afternoon performance. His confidence was absolute, his belief in his own capabilities unshakable. In some ways, she envied him. He lived in a world where weekend courses could transform someone into a tactical expert, where natural talent was more important than years of grueling preparation. Her own experience had taught her different lessons. Real skill came from repetition so intense it became muscle memory. True tactical awareness developed through exposure to actual danger, not simulated scenarios with cardboard targets. The confidence that mattered came not from impressing coworkers, but from surviving situations where overconfidence meant death. After dinner, she settled into her reading chair with her familiar paperback novel. The story was escapist fiction, but she found comfort in its predictable patterns. In the world of the novel, heroes were clearly defined and villains got their comeuppance. Reality was rarely so neat. As she read, Sarah's mind wandered to the strange duality of her current existence. During the day, she played the role of the quiet analyst, invisible and unthreatening. Her coworkers saw exactly what she wanted them to see, a competent but unremarkable woman who posed no challenge to their established social hierarchies. But Beneath that carefully constructed facade, another person remained fully present. The warrior who had earned her place among America's most elite special operations units. The woman who had completed missions that existed in no official records. The professional who had faced enemies Marcus couldn't imagine in places his maps wouldn't show. The two identities coexisted uneasily. Most of the time, Sarah could maintain the balance between who she had been and who she appeared to be. But moments like this afternoon tested her resolve. Listening to Marcus's ignorant pontificating about combat and leadership while he dismissed her as weak required tremendous self-control. Monday morning brought gray Seattle skies and an atmosphere of anticipation to the offices of Meridian Tech Solutions. Word had spread that Marcus Webb had completed his advanced tactical course over the weekend, and employees gathered in small clusters around the coffee machine and copy center, waiting for his latest installment of Warrior Wisdom. Sarah arrived at her usual time, settling into her workstation with the quiet efficiency that had become her trademark. She opened her laptop and began reviewing the Southeast Asian market projections that required her attention, but found it difficult to concentrate as Marcus's voice carried across the office space. "I'm telling you, it was like nothing I've ever experienced," Marcus was saying to an audience of 5 co-workers who had assembled around his desk. Real military-style training. The kind of stuff they don't teach civilians. Derek leaned forward eagerly. What made it different from the regular course? Marcus paused dramatically, clearly savoring the moment. They brought in this consultant, former Navy SEAL, 18 years in special operations. The guy had seen action in places I can't even mention. When he looked at you, it was like he could see right through you. Jennifer shivered theatrically. "That sounds intense." "Intense doesn't begin to cover it," Marcus continued. "This wasn't playing around with cardboard targets. They set up scenarios based on real operations. Hostage rescue, close-quarters combat, multi-target engagement under extreme stress. The whole 9 yards. Sarah's fingers paused over her keyboard. She had worked with Navy SEALs, had trained alongside them in facilities that Marcus would never see. The weekend warrior courses he described bore no resemblance to actual special operations training, but his audience lacked the experience to recognize the difference. "The SEAL instructor pulled me aside after the first scenario," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying that familiar note of self-congratulation. "He said I had something special. Natural tactical instincts that you can't teach. He actually asked if I'd ever considered military service." Tom Bradley had joined the group, his expression skeptical. "What did you tell him?" "I explained that I was committed to my corporate career," Marcus replied smoothly. "But he said the private sector needed people with warrior mindset too. People who could make hard decisions under pressure." Paul Rivers approached the group with his morning coffee. "Sounds like quite an experience. Did everyone who took the course have the same success?" Marcus shook his head gravely. 3 people washed out on the first day. Couldn't handle the pressure. The instructor said that's typical. Most people think they're tougher than they really are until they face genuine stress. He gestured around the office with casual dismissal. It really drives home how few people are cut out for real leadership. The vast majority of the population needs others to protect them when things get dangerous. His gaze swept past Sarah's workstation, and she felt the familiar sting of his implicit categorization. In Marcus's worldview, she represented the helpless masses who required protection from stronger, more capable individuals like himself. "Take our numbers girl over there," Marcus said, nodding towards Sarah's desk. "Sweet kid, probably good at her job, but in a real crisis, she'd be completely helpless." The SEAL instructor could tell just by looking at someone whether they had what it takes. Derek followed Marcus's gaze and nodded knowingly. "You can usually tell who would step up and who would hide when trouble starts." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "It's all about natural courage. Either you have it or you don't. Training can refine your skills, but it can't give you heart." Sarah minimized her spreadsheet and opened her email, using the mechanical task to maintain her composure. Marcus spoke confidently about natural courage while dismissing someone who had demonstrated courage in circumstances that would have broken him mentally and physically. The irony was almost overwhelming. "The really eye-opening part," Marcus continued, "was the psychological component." The SEAL instructor explained how combat stress affects different people. He said that elite warriors actually get calmer under pressure, while ordinary people fall apart. Jennifer looked impressed. That explains why you're so good at handling stressful situations. It's a gift, Marcus said with false modesty. Some people are born to lead, others are born to follow. The military understands this, which is why they're so selective about special operations candidates. Tom frowned. Seems like an oversimplification. Most people just haven't been tested in extreme situations. Maybe, Marcus allowed, but you can usually predict how someone will react based on their daily behavior. Do they take charge or wait for others to lead? Do they seek out challenges or avoid discomfort? The patterns are pretty clear. Sarah closed her email and returned to her market analysis, but Marcus's voice continued to intrude on her concentration. He was describing combat psychology as if he had earned a graduate degree in the subject, explaining stress responses and leadership dynamics with the confidence of someone who had never experienced either in any meaningful way. The morning passed slowly, punctuated by periodic interruptions as employees stopped by Marcus's desk to hear more details about his weekend training. By lunchtime, his story had expanded to include tactical innovations he had suggested to the SEAL instructor and advanced techniques that had impressed even experienced operators. Sarah retreated to her corner table in the break room, opening her paperback novel to a familiar chapter. The fictional spy thriller provided a welcome escape from the office politics and inflated egos that seemed to dominate every conversation in this place. She had been reading for about 10 minutes when Marcus entered the break room with his usual entourage. His voice carried across the small space as he settled at a center table, clearly intending his conversation to reach every corner of the room. The thing about elite military training, he was explaining to Jennifer and Derek, is that it's designed to break you down psychologically before building you back up. Only the strongest personalities can handle that kind of pressure. Derek nodded eagerly. I definitely wouldn't be able to handle that. I get stressed just dealing with difficult clients. That's honest self-assessment, Marcus replied approvingly. Most people can't handle genuine stress. They freeze up, make bad decisions, or just shut down completely. He glanced meaningfully towards Sarah's table. In a real emergency, those people become liabilities rather than assets. Someone else has to take responsibility for keeping them safe. Jennifer followed his gaze and giggled. I wonder how Sarah would handle a dangerous situation. She seems like the type who would panic. Probably call for help and wait to be rescued, Marcus agreed. Some people are just wired that way. Nothing wrong with it, necessarily. But it's important to understand the difference between warriors and civilians. Sarah turned a page in her book, the motion sharp enough to make a soft snapping sound. The conversation continued around her, but she found herself thinking about the vast gulf between Marcus's weekend fantasies and actual combat experience. She had trained in facilities where failure meant starting over from the beginning, had worked with instructors who demanded perfection not for weekend bragging rights, but because lives depended on flawless execution, had faced enemies who were trying to kill her, not impress her with their tactical knowledge. The SEAL instructor said something interesting about natural leadership, Marcus was saying. He explained that true warriors don't need to prove themselves with words. Their actions speak louder than any boasting ever could. The irony was staggering. Marcus spent his days describing his tactical prowess to anyone who would listen, apparently unaware that actual warriors rarely discuss their experiences in public settings. Sarah had never told anyone about her military service, had never sought recognition or validation for missions that remained classified years after their completion. He also said that the quiet ones are usually the most dangerous, Marcus continued, clearly enjoying his role as interpreter of military wisdom. But he meant the strong, silent type, not the scared, quiet type. He gestured towards Sarah's table with casual dismissal. There's a difference between choosing not to speak and being too intimidated to speak up. Real warriors don't need to announce themselves, but they also don't hide from confrontation. Sarah closed her book and stood up, her movements controlled and precise. She walked to the sink, rinsed out her coffee mug, and placed it in the dish rack with mechanical efficiency. As she turned to leave, Marcus couldn't resist one final observation. Perfect example right there, he said just loud enough for her to hear. Runs away the moment things get uncomfortable. That's exactly what I mean about natural followers versus natural leaders. Sarah paused in the doorway, her back to the room. For just a moment, Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders squaring, weight settling into a balanced stance that spoke of combat readiness. But the moment passed, and she continued out of the room without a word. The group around Marcus erupted in nervous laughter, but something in Sarah's brief pause had unsettled Jennifer. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something significant, though she couldn't identify what. "Maybe you were a little harsh," she said quietly. Marcus waved dismissively. "Sometimes people need to hear hard truths. If she wants respect, she needs to earn it by standing up for herself." The afternoon brought its own set of challenges. Sarah worked through complex market analysis while Marcus regaled various audiences with increasingly elaborate versions of his weekend training experience. His story grew more dramatic with each telling, incorporating details that transformed his recreational course into something resembling actual special operations training. Around 3 o'clock, the office was disrupted by a commotion near the main entrance. Sarah looked up from her computer to see two security guards escorting a man in a rumpled business suit toward the exit. The man appeared agitated, gesturing wildly, and speaking in loud, angry tones. "This isn't over," the man shouted as the guards guided him toward the door. "You can't just fire people without consequences. I know where you all live." The guards remained calm and professional, but the man's threats sent a ripple of unease through the office. Employees stood at their desks, watching nervously as the situation unfolded. "Who was that?" Jennifer asked, approaching Marcus's desk for comfort and information. "Dave Patterson from accounting," Tom replied grimly. "He was terminated this morning for embezzling company funds. Apparently, he didn't take it well." Marcus stood up from his desk, assuming an authoritative posture. "Everyone stay calm," he announced to the office at large. "The situation is under control." But even as the guards succeeded in removing Patterson from the building, his threats echoed in the sudden silence that followed. Several employees remained standing, looking shaken by the unexpected confrontation. "I hope that's the end of it," Derek said nervously. The guy seemed pretty unstable. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on Derek's shoulder. "Don't worry, man. If he comes back, he'll have to deal with me. I'm not about to let anyone threaten my coworkers." Sarah observed the scene with professional interest. Patterson had been unstable and angry, but not particularly dangerous. His threats were the product of emotional trauma rather than genuine tactical planning. Still, the incident had clearly rattled her colleagues, who lacked experience in assessing actual threat levels. "Maybe we should call the police," Jennifer suggested, her voice shaky. "The security guards have probably already handled that," Marcus replied confidently. "But you're right to be cautious. In situations like this, you need people who can think clearly and take charge." He looked around the office, clearly positioning himself as the natural leader in any crisis situation. "The important thing is not to panic. Stay aware of your surroundings, trust your instincts, and rely on people who have experience handling dangerous situations." Sarah returned her attention to her computer screen, but she found herself analyzing the office layout from a tactical perspective. Exit routes, potential cover positions, sight lines, and choke points. It was an automatic response, ingrained through years of training that had never fully switched off. The afternoon passed without further incident, but Patterson's outburst had left the office on edge. Employees spoke in hushed tones, frequently glancing toward the entrance as if expecting another disruption. Marcus moved through the space like a self-appointed security chief, offering reassurance and positioning himself as the voice of calm authority. As 5 o'clock approached, several employees expressed reluctance to leave the building alone. Marcus immediately volunteered to escort anyone who felt unsafe, clearly relishing his role as protector. "I'll walk you to your car," he offered to Jennifer, who had remained visibly shaken by the morning's events. "My tactical training taught me to stay alert for potential threats." Derek joined the group, along with 2 other employees who seemed grateful for Marcus's protection. As they gathered their belongings, Marcus explained the importance of situational awareness and described the defensive techniques he had learned during his weekend courses. Sarah packed up her desk quietly, listening to Marcus's impromptu security briefing with professional amusement. He spoke confidently about threat assessment and defensive positioning while demonstrating a complete lack of actual tactical awareness. His attention was focused on his audience rather than his surroundings, and his body language broadcast confidence rather than readiness. As the group prepared to leave, Marcus noticed Sarah gathering her belongings alone. "You coming with us?" he asked, his tone suggesting he was offering charity to someone clearly incapable of protecting herself. Sarah looked up from her laptop bag. "Thank you, but I'll be fine." Marcus shook his head with theatrical concern. "Are you sure? After what happened today, it might not be safe to walk to your car alone. Patterson could be waiting in the parking garage." "I appreciate your concern," Sarah replied evenly, "but I can take care of myself." Marcus exchanged a meaningful look with Derek, clearly communicating his assessment of Sarah's naive overconfidence. "Look, I know you probably think you're being independent, but this isn't the time for false bravado. Sometimes you need to accept help from people who are better equipped to handle dangerous situations." Sarah stood slowly, her compact frame somehow seeming larger despite giving up nearly a foot in height to Marcus. Her dark eyes met his gaze steadily, and, for the second time in recent weeks, something flickered in their depths that made him take an unconscious step backward. "I understand your concern," she said quietly, her voice carrying undertones that none of them could quite identify. "But I really will be fine." The words hung in the air between them, carrying implications that Marcus couldn't quite grasp. There was something in Sarah's tone, something in the way she held herself, that suggested capabilities he hadn't expected to find. But the moment passed quickly. Marcus recovered his composure and shrugged with exaggerated indifference. "Suit yourself," he said. "But don't say I didn't warn you." As Marcus led his group toward the elevator, Sarah gathered her remaining belongings and prepared to leave. The office had grown quiet around her, most employees having already departed for the safety of their homes and families. She rode the elevator down to the parking garage alone, her senses automatically cataloging potential threats and escape routes. The space was dimly lit and largely empty, creating perfect conditions for an ambush if Patterson had indeed decided to escalate his grievances. But Sarah moved through the garage with confident strides, her awareness sharp, but her demeanor relaxed. She had faced far more dangerous situations than a disgruntled former employee, and her training had taught her to project calm confidence even in uncertain circumstances. As she reached her car, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. A figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar about 30 feet away, and she recognized Patterson's disheveled silhouette immediately. He appeared to be watching the elevators, probably waiting for specific targets to emerge. Sarah opened her car door normally, giving no indication that she had spotted the potential threat. Her movements remained casual as she placed her laptop bag in the passenger seat and settled behind the wheel. To any observer, she appeared to be just another office worker heading home after a long day. But as she started her engine and pulled out of her parking space, Sarah's mind was already processing tactical options. Patterson represented a low-level threat, emotionally unstable, but probably not professionally dangerous. Still, her coworkers would be vulnerable if they emerged from the elevator unaware of his presence. She drove slowly toward the garage exit, using her mirrors to track Patterson's position. As she suspected, he remained focused on the elevator bank, apparently waiting for specific individuals to appear. Marcus and his group would be walking directly into a potentially volatile situation, completely unaware of the danger they faced. Sarah reached the garage exit and paused, her hand on the gear shift. She could drive away safely, leaving her coworkers to face whatever confrontation Patterson had planned. They had dismissed her as weak and helpless, had assumed she needed their protection rather than being capable of providing it herself. But as she sat at the exit, engine idling, Sarah found herself unable to leave. Sarah stepped out of her car with fluid precision, her movements economical and silent. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. Gone was the timid office worker who avoided confrontation, replaced by someone whose very presence seemed to alter the molecular composition of the air around her. 30 feet away, Patterson emerged fully from behind the concrete pillar, the tire iron gleaming dully in his grip. His face was twisted with rage and desperation, his wild eyes fixed on Marcus and his group as they walked unsuspectingly toward their cars. "Marcus Webb," Patterson's voice echoed through the parking garage like a gunshot. You think you're so tough? Let's see how tough you really are. Marcus froze mid-stride, his confident demeanor evaporating as he registered the threat. Derek and Jennifer pressed close behind him, their faces pale with terror. The tactical awareness Marcus had bragged about for months was nowhere to be found. He stood rooted in place, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Dave, let's just talk about this. Marcus finally managed, his voice higher than normal. There's no need for violence. Patterson laughed bitterly, hefting the tire iron. Talk. Like you talked when you convinced management to fire me? Like you talked when you spread rumors about my work performance? Sarah moved through the shadows between parked cars, closing the distance with predatory silence. Her breathing remained controlled, her heart rate steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flow through her system. This was familiar territory, not the corporate boardroom kind of familiar, but the life and death kind that had once defined her existence. I never said anything about you, Marcus protested, backing away slowly. This is between you and the company, not us. You're all part of the same machine. Patterson snarled, advancing with the tire iron raised. Taking people's livelihoods, destroying families, acting like you're better than everyone else. Jennifer whimpered behind Marcus, clutching Derek's arm. The group began to scatter, but Patterson was positioned to block their escape routes. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Marcus's weekend warrior training offered no solutions for an actual dangerous confrontation. Sarah reached the optimal position, 15 feet behind Patterson, with clear sight lines and multiple tactical options. She could end this situation in under 3 seconds using any of a dozen techniques that had been drilled into her through countless hours of close-quarters combat training. But instead, she spoke. That's far enough. Her voice cut through the parking garage like a blade, calm, controlled, and carrying an authority that stopped Patterson dead in his tracks. He spun around, searching for the source of the command, and, finally, spotted Sarah standing beside a blue sedan. For a moment, confusion replaced rage on his face. This wasn't the cowering office worker he had dismissed for months. The woman facing him projected danger the way a high-voltage cable projected electricity, invisible but unmistakably present to anyone with the senses to detect it. Get out of here, lady, Patterson snarled, trying to reclaim his momentum. This doesn't concern you. Sarah stepped into the open, and Marcus felt his world shift on its axis. The quiet analyst who had never spoken above a whisper in the office moved with the fluid confidence of someone born to violence. Her posture was balanced and ready, her hands empty but positioned for instant action. Actually, it does concern me, Sarah said, her voice carrying the same deadly calm that had once preceded mission execution in places that didn't appear on any map. You're threatening my coworkers. That makes it my problem. Patterson swung the tire iron in a wide arc, trying to intimidate her into backing down. I'll crack your skull just as easy as theirs. Get out of here before you get hurt. Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying him with professional interest. David Patterson, age 43, recently divorced. 3 kids he sees every other weekend. Gambling debts of approximately $60,000, which is why you were skimming from the company accounts. Patterson's eyes widened. How did you? You've been under investigation for weeks, Sarah continued, taking a measured step forward. Security cameras, financial audits, digital forensics. They have everything, David. Every transaction, every falsified report, every penny you stole. Another step forward, and Patterson found himself backing away despite holding the weapon. Something about this woman's presence was fundamentally unsettling, triggering primitive survival instincts that screamed danger. The divorce wasn't your fault, Sarah said, her voice softer now, but no less commanding. Addiction is a disease. Your ex-wife was trying to protect the kids. She didn't want to hurt you. Tears began mixing with the rage on Patterson's face. You don't know anything about my situation. I know you're not a killer, Sarah replied, taking another step forward. You're a father who made bad choices because you were desperate. Hurting innocent people won't fix your problems, David. It will only create bigger ones. Marcus watched in stunned silence as Sarah continued her approach. She was completely unarmed, facing a man with a deadly weapon, Yet somehow she was the one controlling the situation. Her confidence wasn't the bombastic swagger he had been displaying for months. It was the quiet certainty of someone who had faced far worse threats and emerged victorious. I served with men who came back from war zones with problems like yours, Sarah continued, now within striking distance of Patterson's weapon. They thought violence would solve their pain, but it only made everything worse. Patterson's grip on the tire iron loosened slightly. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I understand pressure, Sarah said quietly. I've been in situations where one wrong decision meant people died, where the enemy was trying to kill me and everyone I cared about, where there was no backup coming and no second chances. She stopped just outside Patterson's reach, her dark eyes meeting his with compassionate understanding. But you're not in a war zone, David. You're in a parking garage, surrounded by people who don't want to hurt you. Your children need their father to come home tonight, not to become a statistic on the evening news. The tire iron dropped from Patterson's nerveless fingers, clattering against the concrete floor. He sank to his knees, sobbing with the release of months of accumulated desperation and rage. Sarah knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. It's going to be okay, David. There are programs that can help. People who understand what you're going through. Behind them, Marcus and his group stood frozen in amazement. The transformation they had witnessed was beyond their ability to process. The quiet mouse had become a warrior, not through violent action but through complete mastery of a situation that had left Marcus paralyzed with fear. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Sarah had discreetly triggered a silent alarm on her phone while approaching Patterson, ensuring that professional help would arrive without escalating the immediate danger. The police are coming, she told Patterson gently. They're going to help you get through this. Your lawyer will probably be able to work out a deal if you cooperate fully. Patterson nodded through his tears, no longer capable of resistance. The fight had gone out of him completely, replaced by the relief of someone who had finally stopped running from his problems. As the first police cars entered the parking garage, Sarah stood and stepped back, allowing the officers to take control of the situation. She provided a clear, concise summary of events, describing Patterson's mental state and recommending professional psychological evaluation. The lead officer, a 20-year veteran named Sergeant Rodriguez, listened to her assessment with growing interest. "Ma'am, you handled this situation perfectly," he said after Patterson had been taken into custody. "Have you had professional crisis intervention training?" Sarah hesitated for just a moment. "Some experience with high-stress situations." Rodriguez nodded knowingly. "Military." "Yes," Sarah said simply. "What branch?" "Navy." "Ratings?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "That's classified." Rodriguez's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't press for details. "Well, whatever your background, you probably saved lives tonight." That man was ready to hurt someone. As the police completed their investigation and departed, Marcus found himself alone with Sarah in the nearly empty parking garage. His co-workers had given their statements and fled, eager to escape the scene of their humiliation. "I don't understand," Marcus said, his voice small and confused. "Who are you?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment, considering how much truth he could handle. "I'm exactly who I've always been, Marcus. You just never bothered to look beyond your own assumptions. But the way you handled that situation, the things you knew about Patterson, you're not just some analyst." "No," Sarah agreed quietly. "I'm not." Marcus struggled to process what he had witnessed. "Are you some kind of federal agent? CIA? FBI?" Sarah shook her head. "I told you the truth. I served in the Navy." "Doing what?" Sarah was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of experiences he couldn't begin to imagine. Things that don't exist in any official record. Places that don't appear on any map. Missions that never happened. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Special operations?" "The most special," Sarah said simply. The implications crashed over Marcus like a cold wave. For months, he had mocked and dismissed someone whose credentials made his weekend warrior fantasies look like children's games. He had lectured about tactical awareness to a person who had operated at the highest levels of military proficiency. "Navy SEALs," he whispered. Sarah neither confirmed nor denied the statement, but her silence was answer enough. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why let people think you were just Just what? Sarah asked. Weak? Helpless? A mouse who runs from confrontation. Marcus had the grace to look ashamed. I'm sorry. I had no idea. That was the point, Sarah said. I came here to be normal. To have a quiet life where the biggest crisis was quarterly earnings reports. She looked around the empty parking garage, seeing the blood and chaos that had once defined her existence superimposed over the mundane corporate setting. But normal isn't as easy as I thought it would be, she continued. Especially when people mistake restraint for weakness. Marcus felt the full weight of his months of casual cruelty settling on his shoulders. I feel like an idiot. You should, Sarah said without malice. You spent months bragging about weekend courses to someone who survived 18 months of BUD/S training. You lectured about tactical awareness to someone who's been shot at by professionals in 7 different countries. She turned toward her car, then paused. But, mostly, you should feel grateful. Grateful that I really am trying to be the quiet girl in the corner, Sarah said. Because the alternative would have been very unpleasant for everyone involved. Marcus watched her drive away, finally, understanding that he had spent months swimming in waters far deeper and more dangerous than his suburban imagination could conceive. The quiet analyst who avoided confrontation was gone, replaced by the knowledge that she had never really existed at all. Sarah drove home through the dark streets, reflecting on the evening's events. Her carefully constructed facade had finally cracked, revealing glimpses of the warrior she had worked so hard to bury. There would be questions tomorrow, rumors, and speculation about her true background. But, as she pulled into her apartment complex, Sarah felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in over a year, she had been allowed to be herself completely. Not the timid office worker or the elite operator, but someone who contained both identities in perfect balance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she could rest in the knowledge that when circumstances had demanded it, the quiet girl had indeed been gone. In her place had stood someone whose presence reminded everyone involved that still Aining had instilled certain principles that transcended personal grievances. Innocent people were potentially in danger, and she had the skills and awareness to help them. She put the car in reverse and drove back into the garage, parking in a position that gave her clear sight lines to both Patterson and the elevator bank. Through her windshield, she could see Marcus and his group emerging from the elevator, talking loudly and paying no attention to their surroundings. Patterson stepped out from behind the pillar, moving to intercept their path to the exit. In his right hand, Sarah could see what appeared to be a tire iron or similar improvised weapon. The quiet girl was about to disappear, replaced by someone Marcus and his followers never could have imagined was hiding in plain sight among them. And for the first time in over a year, Sarah Chen prepared to show them exactly who she really was. She wondered sometimes what would happen if the facade ever slipped. If her coworkers ever glimpsed the person she really was, saw the skills she still possessed, understood the experiences that had forged her into someone entirely different from their assumptions. It was a dangerous thought, one that led down paths she had come to this new life specifically to avoid. Her current existence was safe, predictable, and peaceful. She had traded the adrenaline and purpose of her former career for the mundane security of corporate America. But, as she turned the pages of her novel and listened to the quiet sounds of the city beyond her windows, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the balance was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Marcus's casual cruelties and confident ignorance were testing limits she had thought were safely buried beneath layers of professional composure. The clock on her wall ticked steadily toward bedtime. Tomorrow would bring another day at Meridian Tech Solutions, another round of Marcus's tactical theories and dismissive comments. She could endure it all with the patience she had learned in far more challenging circumstances. But, somewhere in the darkness of her apartment, in the silence between her heartbeats, the warrior within grew increasingly restless. And Sarah began to wonder how much longer she could keep that other version of herself locked away from a world that seemed determined to provoke her into action. LTs and ignorant assumptions indefinitely. Her coworkers would never need to know who she really was, what she had done, or what she was still capable of doing if circumstances required it. But sometimes, in moments like the one she had just experienced, the warrior within stirred restlessly. Sometimes the careful facade felt like a prison rather than protection. And sometimes she wondered what would happen if the quiet girl finally decided she had heard enough. Those were dangerous thoughts, she knew, the kind that led to complications she had come to this new life specifically to avoid. But as she pulled into her apartment complex and prepared for another evening of solitary routine, Sarah couldn't quite shake the feeling that her carefully maintained balance was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Marcus and his followers had no idea how close they were dancing to a fire that burned much hotter than their weekend warrior fantasies could imagine. For their sake, and for hers, Sarah hoped they would never find out. ICS and talk tough about confronting danger. But he had never knelt in desert sand while enemy fire whistled overhead, never made split-second decisions that meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure, never looked into the eyes of someone determined to kill him, and emerged victorious from that ultimate test. Sarah turned off her reading lamp and prepared for bed. Tomorrow she would return to her role as the quiet girl in the corner, the mouse who ran from confrontation, the scared rabbit who had never faced real danger. It was a performance she had perfected, and one that served her well in this strange new world of corporate normalcy. But somewhere in the darkness of her apartment, in the silence between her heartbeats, the warrior she had once been remained awake and watchful, ready to emerge if circumstances ever demanded it. Marcus and his followers had no idea how close they had come to seeing a glimpse of that other Sarah, the one who had earned her place among America's most elite warriors through blood, sweat, and an unbreakable will to succeed. For now, she was content to let them live in their illusions. But illusions, she knew from hard experience, had a way of shattering when reality finally came calling. And when that moment arrived, the quiet girl would be gone, replaced by someone they never could have imagined was hiding in plain sight among them.